Okay, good evening. If I could have your attention, please. I'm Rabbi Avram Rothman, the rabbi of the Thornhill Community Shul, of which you are all here with us today. We'd like to begin our very special program for this year's Holocaust Memorial by beginning with our procession, having 6 of the younger generation come in, each one carrying a candle representing the snuffed out lives of 1 million Jews, each during the Holocaust. After the death of the 2 individuals that we read about in this week's Torah portion, Nadav and Avihu, the Torah tells us Moshe spoke to Aaron and to Elazar and Itamar, his remaining sons. Elazar and Itamar are referred to as the leftover children. The 2 children from the original 4 that Aaron had, having lost Nadav and Avihu to a death when they were quite young. He addresses the 2 leftover children, and Rashi tells us that they were left over from death. And this teaches us that death was decreed upon them as well, as a punishment for what their father Aaron had done for the sin of the golden calf. However, Moshe's prayer nullified half of the decree against Aaron's children, as it says, and I prayed for Aaron too at that time. The word used in the Torah for these 2 children is Hanosarim. Literally means the survivors. The quoted phrase found in this parsha may thus be translated that Moshe spoke to the 2 surviving sons. In today's world, the word survivor means someone who went through the Holocaust and emerged alive. The truth is that survivors carry a special responsibility on themselves. They survived while others perished. In the parsha that we have just read, we mentioned a specific teaching. And there it said that Moshe is referred to by the name Moshe, even though he had many names, because the name Moshe means he who was drawn forth from the Nile. Because you see, Moshe was a survivor. And therefore, Moshe had a responsibility to make the most of his life, having been spared from the destruction of drowning in the Nile. And this is the responsibility of all survivors. But you see, it is not just those people who were in the concentration camps in Europe who were survivors. Even those of us who were over here in the comfort and security of North America, who did not have parents or grandparents who suffered directly in the Holocaust, we should never feel that we are not survivors, for that would be an incorrect way of viewing things. Just like the decree following the sin of the golden calf was against all of the sons of Aaron, but because of God's mercy, 2 of them escaped. The same applies to all of us in regard to the Holocaust. We all must consider ourselves survivors from that decree that befell the Jewish people in the era of the Nazis. Some people bore the brunt of that decree because they were in Europe. But all of us were included in the decree, and all of us who survived are known as survivors. What difference does it make whether or not we, those who were not there, those who were spared, are also survivors? The difference is this very lesson, that we are all like Moshe. We were all pulled from the water. We were taken away before the Holocaust happened. And therefore, if we were all taken from the water, we all have to act as Moshe did. We see it routinely. When a person walks away from a plane crash, it changes his life. 99 people died on this plane, and I survived. I must have survived for a reason. I have to do something with my life. This is how every Jew who lives today must feel. I am a survivor. No, I did not actually survive the Holocaust itself, but my very life is only here today because my parents, by the grace of God, left Europe earlier. And therefore I stand here today as well, a form of a survivor. And as the survivors carry a responsibility to carry on as Jews, to carry on and make sure that the future is secure for Jews, so too all of us who are in a way survivors. And this is how every Jew who lives today must feel. I am also a survivor. The Almighty saves me. It's not enough for me simply to be passive. I have to be like Moshe. I have to be like the other survivors. I have to be involved. I have to be active. I have to care. And I myself, as all of us, must ensure the future of the Jewish people, that such events should never happen to us again. At this time, I would like to begin the first of the candles that we'll be lighting this evening, reminiscent of the various communities who were destroyed during the Holocaust. And I would like to ask the Chesniaks if they would come forward here and light the first candle on behalf of the Jews of Poland who were killed throughout the Holocaust. Thank you very much. This time I would like to ask to have Alex Ravai come forward to bring us into the next part of our program.
One of the most important questions of Judaism is, how do we know that the Torah is true? Even if not the proof in the scientific sense, the most compelling reasoning goes something like this. The events leading up to Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah were witnessed by an entire nation. The veracity of the stories could easily be verified then by the following generation, simply by asking their parents and their still living grandparents who were eyewitnesses to the event. Regarding the Holocaust, it's imperative to ask the same question. How do we know that it happened? We know painfully well that a mere 70 years later there are many who already deny it. Our response as first and second generation descendants of the survivors is very similar to the earlier given reasoning. Our surviving parents or grandparents told us what happened to them. And if they didn't tell us, we could ask them. Their answers uniformly confirmed the horrors that were perpetrated on the Jews of Europe. We belong to a privileged generation. We still have a precious few first-hand eyewitnesses. Our responsibility is to ensure that their history will never be forgotten and will never be falsified. During this past Pesach, we retold the story of the Exodus to our children. We must do the same regarding the Holocaust. Yom HaShoah is designated to be just one such occasion. Tonight we are going to hear the first-hand account of the last two living survivors of a tiny Hungarian village, that of my mother, Ella Revai, and my paternal aunt, Aranka Varadi. Before we start the presentation, I would like to ask Steve to please walk up with your mother to light a candle.
Sorry.
Thank you.
It has been almost 70 years since the Holocaust. To survivors, the horrors remain real and ever present. For most of us, though, 70 years makes the Holocaust seem part of ancient history. Time to time we confront the questions of what happened, how did it happen, how could it happen again? There is one day in the year when we make a special effort to remember. On this one day, we remember those who suffered and those who were martyred. We also remember those who survived, and especially those precious few who are still with us as living testimony to the unimaginable sufferings that so many are eager to discredit and deny altogether. Both my parents were Holocaust survivors, both from the same little Hungarian village called Cigand. According to my observations, there were two groups of survivors, those who couldn't bring themselves to talk about what happened, and those who couldn't stop talking about it. My parents belonged to the second group. I literally grew up with their painfully relived stories and recollections of their tormented youth. My late father, Avram Yitzhak ben Michael alav hashalom, has painstakingly collected and documented the names of the Jewish families of Cigand who perished in the Holocaust. After the passing of my father a few years ago, I created a website dedicated to the memory of the Jewish souls of this little-known village who were murdered in the Holocaust. As a descendant of survivors, I felt I owed this task not only to the victims, but also to the coming generations. This is a partial list of statistics that highlights the magnitude of the tragedy. Of special interest, one must note the brutal effectiveness with which the Jews of Hungary were deported and murdered. Hungary, having been allies of the Germans, escaped the mass deportation of its Jewish population until quite late in the war. Germany occupied Hungary only in March 1944. Adolf Eichmann, with only a handful of his cronies, but with the eager support of the Hungarian gendarmes, managed to round up and deport most of the Jewish population by midsummer of 1944. Of the 300 or so Jewish souls of Cigand, only about 80 survived the Holocaust. Today, we honor the only two living survivors of this little-known village, my paternal aunt, Aranka Varadi, and my mother, Ella Revai. Both suffered the same fate, lost their respective families, and lived through the same hellish events. After the last day of Pesach, April 16, 1944, the Jews of Cigand were rounded up and taken to the ghetto of nearby Sátoraljaújhely. On the picture is the last desperate farewell postcard written to my father by his mother from the ghetto just a few days before their deportation to Auschwitz. We received your parcel, everything was good, but don't send any more. We are leaving. May God be with you, your loving mother. My father, who at the time lived in Budapest, carried this postcard with him throughout his ordeals in Bergen-Belsen. And so, The cattle cars were loaded, and the trains started rolling. Following is the story of her deportation, the torments in the various camps, and the eventual liberation, as written by my mother, Ella Revai.
At the ghetto, we were loaded into cattle cars, 80 to 85 people crammed in each car. No water, no toilet. We were locked in and couldn't imagine where they were taking us or what our fate would be. After a 3 days journey, we arrived in Auschwitz on May the 28th, 1944. They chased everyone out of the train. The women and men were herded separately. The children stayed with their mothers. Here I was separated from my father, whom I never saw again. We were lined up in rows of 5 and marched in front of the SS selection team. Here our fate was decided, life or death. Anyone who was directed to the right by Dr. Mengele stayed alive for the time being. Anyone sent to the left were condemned to die in the gas chambers. The latter we only learned a bit later on. The young ones, among whom I found myself, were taken to the sanitation facilities. They shaved our heads and our bodies. We couldn't even recognize each other. Everyone received a single piece of shabby dress, without regards to size or fit. Later, we exchanged them amongst each other so we could wear them. The insane-looking crowd was ready to march. After all this, they herded us toward the loggers. My crowd ended up in Logger C. I found myself in barrack number 19. There were 32,000 people in the logger and 1,000 people in a barrack. There were bunk beds. On every level, there were 12 people. We were crowded like herrings in a can. If one needed to turn, the entire row had to sit up and turn together. In the mornings, when they woke us, it was still dark outside. We had to line up in rows of 5 at the side of the barracks and stand there for hours, twice each day. The name of this lineup was called Zelapel, roll call. During these roll calls, many fainted, but we were not allowed to help them, lest we would be beaten by the Auserans, female supervisors. When the Zelapel roll call was over, they took us to the latrines. From here, back to the bunk beds. They brought us some soup, 1 portion for 6 people in an aluminum bowl. We took sips by taking turns one by one. The daily bread portions were handed out during the roll calls. Occasionally, they gave us a spoonful of marmalade or some cottage cheese. The latter they slapped directly into our palms. We had no cutlery. Time to time, so that we wouldn't be bored, there came the selections. When there were not enough cattle cars arriving, they picked people from Logger C. The crematoria had to operate continuously. The selections were conducted in the most degrading manner. Most of the time we had to stand bare naked. On our left arms hung our rags that were our clothing. With our bald heads, we looked like patients in an insane asylum. They turned us back to front to check us out and decided who stayed and who would be taken away. Most of the time it was Mengele with his entourage who came to make the selections. Anyone not found to be strong enough, or who even had a minor skin blemish, was taken away. It was during such selections that we noticed that a friend here or an acquaintance there was no longer amongst us. They were taken away. Their disappearances were very painful every time. Occasionally, we were taken to the sanitation stations. They were very afraid of epidemics. Many people had the scabies. On one occasion, my cousin also ended up with this disease. I tried to sneak after her to the camp's infirmary, but didn't succeed in staying with her. When a supervisor checked me out and saw that I didn't have the red spots, she beat me and threw me out. My life in Logger C lasted for 3 months. I'm unable to write down all the daily tortures we had to endure. I don't have the strength, nor can I bear the mental anguish. Every moment of these terrible experiences live in my mind and in my heart. After 3 months, I too was selected. There came a man in a white gown who inspected our hands. He needed 200 women. I was selected into this group. We heard that they would be taking us to work. This is where I lost contact with my friends from my village. All that day we stayed outside the gates of the logger until the evening. We thought to ourselves that the trucks would be coming to take us to the gas chambers. Miraculously, they walked us to another logger. This was Logger B. It was even worse than Logger C. There were only empty barracks, no bunk beds, no toilet, no water, no kitchen. In this logger there were no selections, only the Selapal twice every day. They were just counting and counting us, as if we were that important. For breakfast they brought us some gooey whitish puree, sometimes tea. We were very happy with the latter, as we could at least wash our eyes with it. Otherwise there was no opportunity to wash up. The food was brought to us in containers from another logger. By the time it reached us, half of it spilled to the ground. We used buckets for our needs and then emptied them in trenches. As I mentioned, the barracks were totally empty. In a corner there were piled up rags and blankets. After Selapal, we ran in and grabbed whatever we could. We threw them on the floors and lay down on them. If we couldn't grab one, we just lay on the bare floors. In the neighboring logger was the camp's infirmary. Every night, trucks came by to pick up the dead and half-dead. We were forbidden to go out from our barracks or even look at these happenings. Despite the restrictions, everybody knew what was happening. On one such occasion, we were ordered outside. As we learned, a young girl jumped off the truck and escaped to our barrack. As they counted us, they discovered that there was an extra person. They counted and recounted us. Finally, one of the SS soldiers told us that if the extra person didn't step forward, he would start shooting every fifth person. After several nail-biting minutes, the young girl stepped forward. They took her away immediately. Our days passed with such and similar excitements. We were starving, cold, rain-soaked, and thirsty. There were always a few optimists who encouraged us by saying that it would all end and we would be freed soon. We hardly believed that they would be taking us to work, as we were told earlier at Logger C. Finally, one night in October, they came for us. They shouted for the 200 women who were selected from Logger C. We were very afraid to move. 3 months had passed here, and we couldn't really believe that we would be taken away for work. They counted the 200 and took us from the logger to be cleaned up. We received clothing, coats, shoes, and even some food. They loaded us into cattle cars and left Auschwitz during the night. We had lived for 6 months at that murderous place. After 3 or 4 days of train ride, we arrived in Horneburg. Horneburg is about 25 kilometers from Hamburg. From the train station, they walked us across the city. We found ourselves in a forest. There were 2 newly built barracks waiting for us. The 3rd barrack was built for the supervisors. They gave us 2 blankets, a bowl, and a spoon. Things we hadn't seen for 6 months. It was unbelievable. We were very happy and began to believe that indeed we were brought here to work. And so it was. We worked for an airplane parts manufacturing operation. The sign over the entrance said it was the Lederfabrik, leather factory. Here we had a surprise. The same white-gowned man who selected us from Logger C assigned us to various workstations, again by looking at our hands. We worked in 3 shifts. Every day we had the long walk from the forest to the city. The supervisors, off Sarin, made us sing all the way. We were freezing all winter long. We were bald, no socks, and only a ragtag coat and wooden clogs for shoes. At this location, at least we had some bathing facilities. Here, too, we had wooden bunks, 1 per person. 2 women received 1 cotton towel to share. We wrapped these on our heads and alternated daily with our partners. Of course, the towel was wet from drying ourselves with it every morning. We worked in Horneburg from October to February 1945. In relative terms, this was the most bearable place of all the others. The SS Ausserans, unfortunately, almost without exception, were dreadful. They invented various ways to make our lives miserable. For these women, we were their Sunday entertainment. They had us stand say lapel in our off times. They counted us day and night. On one such occasion, they grabbed me and another girl from Maramarus. They thought that we were laughing at something. They took us to their quarters and they beat us savagely with a wooden rod. For weeks we were turning and tossing from the painful stripes on our backs. We were not to tell anyone what they had done to us. Had they had any human souls, we could have been spared these extra tortures. At the factory, the food wasn't too bad. The factory manager wasn't treating us badly either. Our immediate supervisor was a Dutch prisoner who was exceptionally nice. Occasionally, he brought us apples. He tried to lift our spirits by saying that the war couldn't last much longer. I wish we knew his name. Today, he could be acknowledged as a righteous Gentile. His humanity in these circumstances meant the world to us. And so time was passing. The air raids became more frequent. Hamburg was being bombed. Suddenly, one February day, they put us on a train to some place. We never knew where they were taking us or what our fate would be. We arrived at a place called Porta. There was a hidden factory carved deep down inside a karst mountain. They put us to work immediately. As we learned later on, the place was being built by male prisoners, many of whom died as a result of the very harsh conditions. Here again, we met with our Dutch supervisor, who was brought here before us in order to set up the factory for our arrival. Here we lived and worked in unimaginable circumstances. We hardly had anything to eat. Even if they brought us some soup, by the time the containers arrived to the mountain, most of it spilled to the ground. There was hardly any left to distribute. While we worked, we heated some water on the gas burners, which were used to seal the glass tubes that we made, and we drank it in order to have some strength to finish the shift. Here at Porta, even our kind Dutch supervisor couldn't help us any longer. Often he said that he didn't have anything to pass on to us. He truly felt sorry for us. The Germans urged us to produce more. They thought it would help their cause. Later on, even this place was no longer safe. The Allies were rapidly approaching. There was some hurried construction of new barracks at Porta. Our work was stopped. One day they brought us up from the cave factory and marched us on. Perhaps they didn't know where to. They took us to the new barracks built at Porta. There were many prisoners crowded there. They were trying to hide us from the approaching liberators. There was total chaos. Soon they took us further from there to Fallersleben and Aldensleben, sometimes by train, at other times on foot. Here or there they left behind 50 to 60 prisoners, Häftlings, depending on how many the loggers on the way would accept. The situation was horrific. Finally, the Americans caught up with us, and we were liberated at Salzwedel on April the 14th, 1945. Here, too, there was a concentration camp with who knows how many people. We were all starved, walking skeletons. When they started shouting that we were liberated, we didn't even have the strength to walk to the gates. As it turned out, the Germans tried to blow up the laager before the Americans got there. Fortunately, there were some already liberated Italian Jewish prisoners in town. They noticed what was being prepared and they managed to cut the wires. The Germans had no time to repair the damage because the Americans arrived. We owe our lives to these Italian prisoners. The same night, the Americans took us by trucks to an evacuated German military base. They gave us beds and fed us. There was plenty to eat, and they were very mindful of our cleanliness. The survivors started searching for their relatives and friends. There were lists prepared with everyone's names, which were copied and taken to other liberated groups at nearby facilities. Many found relatives or friends this way. We started moving about. The situation was quite chaotic. The Germans were gone. We were free. We found temporary refuge at nearby Hilleslaven, which was a picturesque little town. Beautiful trees and shrubs and flowers, just like a vacation spot. Tidy houses with flowers everywhere. Cleanliness all around. After a hellish year, everything looked miraculous to us. The Americans took good care of us, except they were not in a hurry to get us back home. We in turn wanted to return eagerly, hoping to find surviving family members. I'm not going to detail our return trip to Hungary. It was quite complicated. The rail lines were damaged. Train traffic was sporadic. There were many stops and long periods of waiting along the way. Arriving back home had only offered more pain and sorrow. Only a handful of the younger folks survived and returned to our village. My entire family perished. Only an uncle returned from a Russian prisoner camp. And this too has passed. We started our lives anew, literally from nothing. I'm 88 years old now. I know I'm missing lots of details. Many a thing I don't even remember anymore. Regrettably, when I was younger, I didn't make the time to write everything down.
And so, two indomitable souls have triumphed. If any consolation or compensation is possible for their sufferings, it is the joy of seeing their lives continue through the next generations. Our duty and promise is never to forget. Patients. At this time, I would like to thank my cousin's wife, Darlene Varadi, who helped narrate the story. And I would like to ask my wife and Darlene to bring my mother to light another candle.
If you hold it all later, okay?
I'd like to thank Alex for all of his work together with Jason Friedman in making this program possible that we have seen so far. One of the important pieces of memorabilia of remembering the Holocaust that we have here in our synagogue is usually kept inside of this box right here. And the box is kept out in the lobby so that when anyone enters into the building, one of the first things they see is the object that's kept inside. And what's kept inside of this box is a Torah that was brought to us by the Taylor family of South Africa, who have, if you've been here before, you will know that we explained the entire story, that this was actually went through the Holocaust itself, had been greatly damaged, and was kept as a family keepsake right up until this time. And it was at this point that the Taylors felt that it was important to share the experience of this Torah, that the Torah, almost as if it could tell the story itself, should be somewhere where people can come and see it, can read the story that is found within the glass box here, and can remember just a bit of what happened at that occasion. So I believe if we are ready, if everyone would rise, please, we would like to bring in the Torah and place it back into its usual location. Thank you very much. You may be seated. The Taylor family come forward and light a candle for us in memory of those who perished and the story of the Torah itself. So, Dr. and Mrs. Taylor. Virtually everyone who comes and participates in this special event here every year would have to know that this is really the very special program that is organized for us every year by Mr. George Friedman. And George and Vera, his wife, were unable to attend, being that they're away. Although I can tell you that George's long arm, all the way from Florida, organized every aspect of the evening, and throughout the entire evening. So we would like to ask if George's son and daughter would come forward. George and Vera's son and daughter would come forward and light the next candle. Thank you. And now we'd like to ask the Gabbai and the Chazan of our Shul, Mr. Brian Callan, to come forward and to recite the Kalmali Rachamim, the memorial prayer for the 6 million. At that time, we'd like to, if everyone would please rise.
El Rachamim Shoyechein Mamroimim Hametzei Menachanachayna Al Kanefei Ashkina B'mahalois Kedoshim Toharim Kezoya Rakia Mazirim Es Nishmois HaKedoshim VaToharim Shehumesu Visheneharagu, Vishenishchatu, Vishenisrafu, Vishenitbau, Vishenechneku, Al Kiddush Hashem, Al Yidei Etzlerim Agermanim, Yemach Shemam, V'zicharam Ba'avoy Shebli neder ten tzedakah But azkarat nich moisei Began Eden Teimenu chasom Lochem balarachamim Yastireim betzedek anofav loilomim Mitzror bitzror chayim Ez nish moiseyem Adonai hu nachlasam Mianuchu v'shalom amishkavoiseyem v'noi maramein.
You may be seated. One of the other individuals whose strong words to our community a number of years ago was part of the inspiration for us to have this event here in our synagogue on a yearly basis. And that's Mr. Abby Becker. Mr. Becker, who you may remember if you were here last year, spoke and told us his experiences in the Holocaust. He's not well and is unable to attend this year, but in his honor, I would like to light the 6th candle.
Iskadar Shmei Rabba. Amen. Yom HaShoah. Yom HaShoah. Yechon v'yamechon v'chayev chol beis Yisrael. B'agol v'zman korim b'yimero amen.
Amen. Hey Shmei Rabba. Bora b'ola v'yamei omayu.
Yisborach, Yishtabach, Yisboach, Yisraman, Yisnasei. Yisadar, Yisalei, Yisalol, Shmei Yikitcher v'yichu. Li'elim min kol b'chusu v'shirusu. Tishbachusu v'nachamusu. Namir Yom HaShoah.
Amen.
Yeheshlu v'gavu min Shemai. V'chaim u'ein v'kol Yisrael amen.
Amen.
U'se Shul v'mroimah. Yase Shul v'u'einu v'kol Yisrael amen.
Amen.